but at the same time, in dismissing this idea and saying, okay, well, let's believe that what Kelly was getting was actually accurate, I think it's very important to emphasize, if we're going to take True and Faithful seriously, that Kelly was the person who was most suspicious of the angels. He was also the only person interacting with them. Dee was not usually generally directly interacting with angels. Occasionally, and he'll make notes when he says that he heard a voice or he saw something or something like that, but that's rare. Usually he's talking through Kelly, and Kelly's the one who thinks they're lying and full of shit and trying to manipulate them, and he's also the only one who's talking to them. So I think that we need to take him a little bit more seriously when he's suspicious of different things and look at the record and say, okay, if there are different times that Kelly's kind of freaking out and thinking that he's getting fucked with, he's the only one who's having these interactions, so maybe we should trust him a little bit more and consider the possibility that at this point in the record something's wrong, or there's a miscommunication, an unreliable transmission, something like that. And then, of course, you have to consider the fact that sometimes the angels are telling things that are offensive to Kelly's morality or offensive to Dee's morality, and they're getting upset by this at the same time. There's a whole lot of shit to weigh in on, and I don't think that any of it is something that can be easily dismissed. It all has to be factored into the equation. It all has to be taken very seriously and considered thoughtfully, and the only way to do that, unfortunately, is to look at what exists of the actual record, which is very little. And I will say, this is practically an aside at this point, which I would hope would be obvious, but I will state it clearly. These diaries, whether it's 5 Books of Mystery, True and Faithful, you have to look at them side by side with an actual historical record of what's going on in Dee's life at the time, what's going on with Kelly at the time. We don't have a lot of that information, especially with Kelly. Kelly is a mysterious fucking dude. Very little is known about him. But with Dee, at least, you can usually look at a book of actual history and find out what was going on, because he'll make little notes in his records and in his diaries about kind of what's happening in the larger world, but they're not in great detail, and a lot of the time when he's talking about certain things to the spirits, they have to do with the political situation in England, the political situation in Europe, what's actually going on in the world at the time, and he doesn't necessarily state that clearly in his diaries. So those are definitely factors to consider. I think it's logical to assume that there are certain points in time that they're being fucked with. That's part of the reason that they have to reform the tables, they have to reform the keys. There's different times that angels come back and they say, no, wait, this was wrong and this was wrong. And they usually blame Kelly for this. It's like, oh, it was his error, it was his mistake, he heard it wrong or he saw it wrong or whatever. But I mean, all that just leads us into the same place where there's an attempt to have something communicated which is imperfect, essentially. And then eventually what the angels are trying to do is reinterpret the Bible and biblical stories and the whole idea of the Christian Hebrew religion, monotheism essentially, into a new way of looking at it and a new way of interpreting it. Which is really funny because, of course, what this gives rise to in the Enochian system is a group of people who kind of latch onto this and they become very hostile to the idea of religion altogether. And actually, anyone who uses the phrase organized religion should be dragged out into the street and shot, because organized religion, organized to do what? What's the religion mean? Like, it's not a blanket phrase that covers every organized religion. It's completely dependent on what the individual religion is there to do and what the organization is there to do. So organized religion is one of the most meaningless phrases in fucking human history. Yeah, so Kelly also has the same hostility, and this is one of the things that I find is prefigured in True and Faithful that comes back in the Book of the Law later on, where Kelly is very hostile to what the angels are saying. Crowley was also very hostile to the Book of the Law initially. There's a moment in True and Faithful where it's kind of interesting, where the angels are talking about this book of silvered leaves that they want John Dee to write, and how they want him to record these particular things, and Dee is trying to get from the angels what they want him to do with this book when they have it, and Kelly won't really answer the question. And he says at one point, he's just like, I'll answer for them, just burn it, get rid of it, destroy it, because anything that comes from these things is not good, essentially. And that's almost prefigures the Tunis comment of, which basically tells you, once you've read the Book of the Law, destroy it. Get rid of it, don't study it. see it gone. And I think that's significant, and it's particularly significant, and that Crowley would identify with Kelly based on the work, because there's very little. Kelly wrote like one book on alchemy, which is barely readable. It's not very interesting, and he doesn't say anything really revolutionary. It's a book on alchemy. It's all right. But at the same time, if you're going to look at the record, you would think if someone just had some kind of fandom, or they were like into like these guys and they wanted to like pull some kind of hero worship, it would be Dee. You would think, because he's kind of like he's the hero of the story in many ways, whereas Crowley really attached to Kelly, and there's not a lot about Kelly in there. This is interesting, and I think that weighs into exactly why it is that Crowley considered himself to be the reincarnation of Kelly. Really, in those little glimpses of Kelly's personality, because you only get little glimpses, really, in these books. But at the same time, in those little glimpses, he saw something in himself. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of personal stuff. I don't really want to. It's hard to know at what point I should be like telling stories from these. I think people should read them. One thing I'm explicitly not doing today or next time or any of these times, I'm not going to be repeating any stories that you can read in Donald Tyson's book, Enochian Magic for Beginners, because you can read it in that book. Kelly really bothered the angels, and you can tell because they get pissy with him later on, and he gets pissy with them. It's much, and again, looking at the prefiguring, you can see this with Crowley's work, with the Abramelin operation. With the Amelantra operation particularly. Crowley pisses off the spirits that he's talking to. He keeps demanding that they give him proofs, and they're kind of like, well, I'll give you this proof and that proof, and now just fucking do what I say. Like, we're done. Like, I've proven myself to you, just go with it. And Crowley keeps pestering them. Every little piece of information, he wants to make sure you prove this, you show me, you tell me exactly what's going on. Kelly's very much like that. There's one, probably my favorite part of the whole thing, is where he asks an angel to lend him 100 pounds. It's like, and especially the use of the word lend. It's like, are you paying him back? How are you going to do that? But he's constantly making these kind of demands on angels and on spirits, and Crowley's doing the same thing. And like with the Amelantra working, he basically he says himself in his confessions, I exhausted the spirit. I was sick of him, he was sick of me, we were sick of each other, we couldn't fucking handle this shit anymore. And he admits that as sort of a failing. And you can see this with Dee and Kelly as well. There's times that the angels are telling Dee and Kelly, much as they did with Crowley and the Amelantra working, they told Crowley, it's like, you got to go to Italy. Go to Italy and do this. And Crowley's like, well, I need money, I need time. And they're like, fuck off, go to Italy. And it's pretty much the same with Dee and Kelly. And they make the same argument. We can't just uproot. We gotta get our families, get our houses in order, get all that stuff. And the angels are just like, no, go, Poland now. Off your ass. And this is kind of the big thing. It's those little leaps of faith that very few occultists are willing to make. And I hate to use the F word. You dropping F-bombs up in here with the faith thing. But at the same time, it's like, if you take ceremonial magic seriously, and you seriously believe